No, I don't have him.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
No.
Okay, maybe it doesn't come through.
No.
I'll check on the back. Not good.
It was a using a mic.
Listening.
Deux, trois, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
You can already find it.
You want me to speak?
Go on the side. Okay, this should be clear. Hello. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 2, 3. No, 1, 2, 3. Ah, 1, 2, 3. We are reading the fourth chapter of Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, titled The Eternal Beyond the Mind. And this chapter covers the verses 4 to 8, where the Kena Upanishad answers the question that it has raised. It describes the relationship between our mind and senses and the Brahman. In his commentary, Sri Aurobindo says, obviously, Brahman is not a thing subject to our mind, senses, speech, or life force. It is no object seen, heard, expressed, sensed, formed by thought, nor any state of body or mind that we become in the changing movement of the life. This, he says, is obvious. But the thought of the Upanishad attempts to awaken deeper echoes from our gulfs than this obvious denial of the mental and sensuous objectivity of Brahman. So the goal here is, in the very way the Upanishad approaches this question and the form in which it provides an answer, is this intention the attempt to awaken deeper echoes from our gulfs. In other words, deep within us, in layers of which we are not conscious, there is already a deeper knowledge, a knowledge in which we already perceive the reality of Brahman, in which we already experience the touch of that consciousness and its truth and reality, even layers in which we are one with that which we now seek to know. And it is from these deeper layers that something has to emerge. When it emerges, it does not come up all at once. It's as if a deep unheard sound echoing through distant corridors, and some kind of a vibration, some kind of a sensation comes up to our registering consciousness. And that provides the first point of contact. We feel something familiar, something deeper, something new, something real. And as we turn towards it, it's as if our consciousness tunes in to feel more, to listen more, to receive more directly. And so Sri Aurobindo's articulation of this is so accurate, so suggestive. The Upanishad attempts to awaken deeper echoes from our gulfs than this obvious denial. It affirms that not only is it not an object of mind or a formation of life, but it is not even dependent on our mind, life, and senses for the exercise of its lordship and activity. It is that which does not think by the mind, does not live by the life, does not sense by the senses, does not find expression in the speech, but rather makes these things themselves the object of its superior, all-comprehending, all-knowing consciousness. This is where we had paused. And we can use here an analogy which Sri Aurobindo himself has used in his writings, of the writer of a novel or a play. And the writer conceives of the experience of the novel. What does he want the reader to experience at the end of it? Will the experience of the reader be a one of thrill, of tension, of anticipation, perhaps fear? Will it be an experience of love, sweetness, romance, passion? Will it be one of curiosity, provoking thought, surprising ideas? Whatever he chooses becomes now the theme throughout that novel. And at that point, nothing of the form of the novel has been given still. The characters, the events, nothing has been created. When the Brahman thus dwells on the manifestation of the cosmos, there is this very early sense of the cosmos, the mood of the cosmos. What will that whole drama be like? What will be the nature of the experience of the participants? And nothing of the details have been worked out, only the mood, which is completely formless, free of space, free of time, and yet it contains in itself a whole possibility of a type of experience. And then the novelist addresses that mood to a particular audience. He says, will it be a young couple? Will it be a man who has been through life and is on the brink of retirement and is pulled back to life because of a crisis? What will be the range of the audience, and in what way will it be drawn in? And then the forms of the players begins to take on a more specific, distinct character. Even then, there are so many possibilities. Here is the actual storyline. Will it be presented in this sequence, or will it be the ending and then the flashback? When you see Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, the entire text of nearly 24,000 lines is all taking place in a single day. The very first line is the beginning of that day, just before dawn, the hour before the gods awake. And the last line is towards the setting sun. And everything has taken place in that one day. But in the narration of the day, all the story before is given as a flashback. And suddenly we are brought to the point, this was the day that Satyavan must die. But what brought to this day? And then we are taken back to the whole story of Ashwapati and so on. And so an entire lifespan, an eternity of time has to be placed and arranged in a limited form, presented in a certain way. And it is here that the specifics of the form are expressed. When the Brahman thus conceives of the experience of the cosmos, from that high station of the mood of the experience, the theme of the manifestation, he moves also to the specifics of the forms and the unfolding in space and time. In our turn to recognize, to experience, to understand something of that consciousness, we are beginning from the other end. We are inside the story. And from within the story, it is as if we're trying to understand why this story, why this form. But we do not recognize that the consciousness which chose this storyline was itself so free from the story. It stood outside, it was not bound even to this story. It had a million possibilities of which it picked this. And even those millions of possibilities themselves are only one aspect of the infinite moods and themes that he could have manifested, which are still within him. So it is almost as if impossible for us from within that extreme, narrow, specific expression to get a glimpse of the vastness and freedom of this mind. And yet, there is a continuity from his conception down to our material expression. And so there is a thread deep within us, as if, which goes back all the way to that consciousness of which it and we are an expression. So when we see, when Sri Aurobindo says, it is that which does not think by the mind, which does not live by the life, we find it difficult to conceive of that consciousness. He says, rather, it makes these things themselves the object of its superior, all comprehending, all knowing consciousness. A consciousness which comprehends all, knows all. And what is the scope of the all? Not only all the possibilities that can be in this universe, but all the universes that could have been and the types of universes that could be. And from that mind, which is all knowing, all comprehending, in which all possible universes and all non universes even exist, he works out this particular rhythm, this particular form. So he says, Brahman thinks out the mind by that which is beyond mind. There's a very interesting incident narrated from the life of Galileo when the church asks him, what if God had not put the planets to move in this perfect mathematical orbit? What if God had made the planets move like this zigzag? And Galileo replies, then God would have given us a mind which would also go like this zigzag, to understand, to appreciate the way the planets move. And in a sense, we see here a deep truth that there is a coherence between everything in the cosmos. If the planets move in this way, our mind is molded by the same power that moves the planet this way. And so it is molded in a way that it sees this way as the obvious way, as the right way. When we ask a very simple question, if this leads to the next and the next leads to the other, therefore this leads to the other. A very simple statement of logic. Why? We can't explain it. It's just like that. We see it and we say it's obvious. Because our mind is molded to see this as obvious in a universe in which this is the pattern and rhythm that the divine has expressed. In other words, whatever the divine manifests will be always to the mind the obvious thing, the right thing, the natural thing, because our mind is molded by the very thing which manifests this pattern. If the universe was completely warped, where the pattern would be zigzag, our mind would see the zigzag as obvious and would find in it the formula to express zigzag as the most simple, natural rhythm for the planet to move. There could also be a universe which the Brahman could conceive and manifest, in which the mind is completely different. And each mind is different from the material experience. And so you would find one planet moving in a perfect circle, another in an ellipse, another in a zigzag. One mind would see this as valid, another would see that as valid. It would then not be a cosmos, but a chaos. It would not be ordered. It would be disparate, fragmented. There would be lines which would not join. There would be patches of experience which would have no coherence with another experience. There would be discontinuities, fragmentations, and chaos. That too could be conceived by the Brahman. The question then is, which among all the infinity of such possibilities would the Brahman manifest? In a sense, he does manifest them all to different degrees, or in the play, works out each of these possibilities partially. There is an appearance of chaos, but there is an underlying order behind the chaos. But the Brahman manifests that which is most complete of itself, of its reality, of its truth. And because he is one, therefore a universe in which the oneness can be revealed and played with, where there is a coherence, where there is a continuity, would be more complete expression of himself. The chaos is withheld or is allowed to play as a superficial phenomenon. So in this way, all the possible universes are actually put out, but in partiality. The underlying reality is this, which is a more complete expression of him. And in the long journey of evolution, there is a whole unfoldment of various such possibilities. There are layers from the material through the subtle, where these universes play out their worlds, their partial realities. Worlds of chaos also exist. Worlds of extreme order, almost mathematical, rigid, also exist, and everything in between. And in the material world, it is as if all of its infinity of possibilities are worked out in fragments, to degrees, and allowing freedom even to play among them. And that is why the universe is so beautiful, so complete, not only in its expression, but in the potential which it still holds that is yet to come. But all of this is held in a consciousness which sees it all in a single sweep. Brahman thinks out the mind by that which is beyond mind. And therefore, our mind, which is also thought out along with everything else which has been thought out into manifestation, our mind also is given all of these gradations of experience. Our mind also starts with a kind of an unstable seed-like formation, grows from there to greater and greater complexity, harmony and completeness, until eventually it can grow into something which can share in the mind of Brahman. And we are somewhere in between, in preparation for something, an entry into sharing in the mind of Brahman. When we think of the world in this way, when we think of Brahman in this way in relation to us, a relationship is set. This is the question Sri Aurobindo asks. What is the relation of this phenomenon to that reality? Which is the question that is being answered by the Kena. And here we begin to see a sense of continuity. And our mind itself, in that continuity, is destined, intended, eventually to experience the mind of Brahman. But that is something so different that all of the current capacity of the mind to conceive, to know, to understand are insufficient. So this mind is thought out by that which is beyond mind. And yet it is thought out in a different way. In the same way, he says, Brahman sees the sight and hears the hearing by that absolute vision and audition, which are not phenomenal and instrumental, but direct and inherent. While our instruments have to go through a whole process to be able to see, that is itself all that it sees. There is no in between, there is no process. Nothing is hidden from it. The closest we have to this experience is when we say we are aware of our own awareness. Our awareness is now revealed to our own awareness. We are the awareness. And you notice this is in fact the center of our identity. This in fact is the projection of the consciousness of the self as closely as it can come into the physical mind and as close to the senses as it can be. But in itself, it is not bound to form. This awareness is formless, not located anywhere in particular. Although we tend to place it in our larger body awareness somewhere in the head, but this pure sense of awareness that is aware is simply. It's as if a tiny fragment reflected, reflection of a reflection of a reflection of the awareness of Brahman. And so you carry there some sense of the nature of how Brahman is aware of himself or sees and hears. Our physical eyes, because they are bound to processes, they can never truly see everything. They can see what is not themselves within limitations. They cannot see themselves. Can your eyes see your own eye? You could put a mirror in front and see a reflection. But you can never see directly the retina itself. In the very act and inherent. It forms our expressive speech out of its creative word. It speeds out this life we cling to from that eternal movement of its energy, which is not parceled out into forms, but has always the freedom of its own inexhaustible infinity. In fact, each of these statements is also a very deeply scientific statement because it is a description of the reality, which also science is approaching from a different track. And it is interesting that when science explores the nature of matter and goes deep enough, we come to this concept of a notion of energy. This was particularly developed in the early 30s when going through all the subatomic particles, there was the recognition that there is a huge amount of energy which is existent, even at what we would call the lowest temperature, at 0 degrees, there is a notion of energy. And that's why it was called 0 point energy. When all is taken away and you go down to the lowest level where nothing moves, 0 degrees Kelvin, you still have huge energy. How much? And the problem is when you actually start doing the mathematics, you get infinities. You get an infinite amount of energy there. And what is infinity? It is not a number, it is not a fixed quantity. It means the energy pours out unendingly. It is a dynamic state where it is going on pouring and pouring and pouring. It's coming from somewhere, we don't know where, but it continues unendingly, inexhaustibly. And since mathematics cannot operate with that, physics is meaningless when we hit infinities. So there's a whole mechanism in physics to eliminate energies beyond a certain range. And the entire quantum of energy then is made finite, measurable. But that measure is so large that, again, it becomes a humongous number. And this is what Sri Aurobindo is describing when he says this life we cling to is a small parceling out into form from that which has always this freedom of its own inexhaustible infinity. And this idea of inexhaustible infinity is that it is not an infinity which is static, but always something pouring out, always something new emerging, things which did not exist before, always a fresh breath of its creative energy pouring into manifestation. And the expressive speech out of its creative word. Sri Aurobindo does not elaborate much because the very next chapter is on this theme, the supreme word. What is meant by speech? What is meant by this creative vibration, particularly in the context of the Vedic worldview? Thus, the Upanishad begins its reply to its own question. It first describes Brahman as mind of the mind, sight of the sight, hearing of the hearing, speech of the speech, life of the life. It then takes up each of these expressions and throws them successively into a more expanded form so as to suggest a more definite and ample idea of their meaning, so far as that can be done by words. To the expression mind of the mind corresponds the expanded phrase, that which thinks not with the mind, that by which the mind is thought, and so on, with each of the original descriptive expressions, to the closing definition of life behind this life, as that which breathes not with the life breath, that by which the life power is brought forward into its movement. We have read those verses, we need not review them. And each of these exegetic lines is emphasized by the reiterated admonition that Brahman seek to know, and not this which men follow after here. Neither mind, life, sense, and speech, nor their objects and expressions are the reality which we have to know and pursue. True knowledge is of that which forms these instruments for us, but is itself independent of their utilities. So here the admonition repeated, and remember in the Upanishad, repetition has a very important place. It is meant to serve a very important purpose. No word is repeated without meaning. And yet, each of these verses, from verse 4 to verse 8, repeats, know that to be the Brahman and not this which men follow after here. So in the wording in Sanskrit, it says, Tadeva Brahman Tvam Vidhi. So the word with, to know, Vidhi, is the same root as Vijnana. To know profoundly, intimately, an essential truth. And so when it says know that, in the translation, we lose the deeper sense of the know. Because in English, when we say know that, the knowing is very superficial. But the word used in Sanskrit, vidhi, tells you deep knowledge. Go to an essential knowing in identity. Know that. And tad eva, emphasizing that it is only that, not anything else. So the affirmation here is a force. Know only that. And then not this which men follow after here. And the this is obviously this domain of experience which we have been describing in relation to the Brahman. Now, in this admonition, the idea is not to abandon the world, but to know the world in its deeper reality. It could be easily misunderstood to say, oh, therefore, this world, this sense, this life, this mind, abandon and chase after that. But in the very act of bringing us to this admonition, the Upanishad has already set up a relationship describing the Brahman and this. If Brahman is a mind of this mind, then when he says not this but that, it is to know mind of Brahman, of which this is a fragment and limited expression. So not this but that means to know the mind of Brahman in its totality. Not this but that means to know the creative word of Brahman and not this speech of which it is a fragment. And in this sense, the knowing that and not this is not an abandonment of the world, but a going deeper into the reality of the world experience, to that which is the origin, the source, and the completeness, the absolute of this relativity of the world experience. Through each of these passages, so it is seen in its right sense, it is a fulfillment of life, a going to the deeper truth of things, a completeness, rather than accepting a superficial, limited, fragmented, and even deceptive appearance of things. So Sri Aurobindo in his commentary says, True knowledge is of that which forms these instruments for us, but is itself independent of their utilities. True possession and enjoyment is of that which, while it creates these objects of our pursuit, itself makes nothing the object of its pursuit and passion, but is eternally satisfied with all things in the joy of its immortal being. And such is then our experience in our discovery of that. This completes the chapter we are reading, and now Sri Aurobindo takes up a very important part of this whole discussion where the modern mind would have balked, been surprised at this vocabulary when the Upanishad asks, by whom impelled is this word that men speak? Now, in the way the modern mind thinks, speech is only one of the expressive sense forms. We have 5 senses of reception, and then we have a few senses of action, and speech is only one of the actions. Like we can move our legs to move, we can move our hands to act, and we can speak to communicate thoughts or feelings. It does not have any specifics, deeper sense. But for the Vedic vocabulary, speech, the word itself, was used in a particular way, and the human power of speech, of the voice, was seen in a much more profound sense as a representation of the creative power of the divine. And why this particular connection? Why not the hands being an expression of that? We will see shortly. And this is the reason why Sri Aurobindo takes up this idea for a full elaboration of a chapter before he moves on to the means by which we are to realize and know the Brahman in his totality. And the necessity of the supermind becomes the next chapter. So this chapter will now take up the supreme word. Sri Aurobindo observes that when the Upanishad answers its questions, listing these 5, it puts the word first, and then mind, then eye, then ear, then breath. And he says this is not something which we would have normally done, and there's a reason for it. The Upanishad, reversing the usual order of our logical thought, which would put mind and sense first, or life first and speech last as a subordinate function, begins its negative description of Brahman with an explanation of the very striking phrase, speech of our speech. So we normally view speech as a function of life force. Therefore, the right thing would have been to put life first, or mind as the primary means of awareness. Therefore, mind should have been first. Why is it, therefore, that it puts speech? And Sri Aurobindo now answers this question. And we can see that it means a speech, capital S, beyond ours, an absolute expression of which human language is only a shadow, and as if an artificial counterfeit. What idea underlies this phrase of the Upanishad and this precedence given to the faculty of speech? Continually, in studying the Upanishads, we have to divest ourselves of modern notions and to realize as closely as possible the associations that lay behind the early Vedantic use of words. We must recollect that in the Vedic system, the word was the creatrix. The word, capital W, was the creatrix. By the word, Brahma creates the forms of the universe. Moreover, human speech at its highest merely attempts to recover, by revelation and inspiration, an absolute expression of truth, which already exists in the infinite above our mental comprehension. Equally, then, must that word be above our power of mental construction. So we look at it in a different way now, and we are approaching a deeper understanding of the Vedic vocabulary and conception. In the Veda, every physical form, every physical function or power is seen in terms of a higher power of which this physical function is a representation or a limited expression. So the physical fire is the physical manifestation of Agni, which is a cosmic principle and power. And if we had to use the fire, we would say capital F. In Sanskrit, there is not this capitalization, so it would still be called Agni. But the meaning of Agni then is defined in terms of its cosmic movement, of which the physical fire is only a limited representation. The form of the universe is described in the form of a human body. The body of knowledge is described as having four parts: the head, the shoulders, the abdomen, the legs. And so the human body itself is seen as a representation, microcosmos, of the larger cosmos. Since the Vedic vision was characterized by underlying oneness and continuity, it saw everything in terms of continuities. So the physical body is in continuity going back all the way to the body of the universe. The physical fire is going back in continuity all the way to that power, creative, formative power that we know as Agni, and so on. Seeing things in continuity, then, the functions of the body also would correspond to functions or cosmic powers. In one of the Upanishads, there is a description of how, when the human body is made and the gods find it a fit enough instrument, all the Vedic deities choose a particular location in the body to enter it and to inhabit it. And it tells you in that symbolism how each part of the body and its functions carry behind a certain psychological principle and behind that a spiritual power of which they are a representation. Seen in this way, the human body is only a symbolic representation of the totality of the cosmos, where everything that exists in the cosmos, even at its highest spiritual level, is represented here symbolically in the most material part of us. And there is a continuity from the symbol all the way down to the material. Now you can see what a powerful idea this is in terms of its implications. One obvious implication is we are the universe in microscopic form. Second implication is within us are all the powers of the cosmos represented. Therefore, we can also wield those powers if we can tune in and embody them more completely. Third implication is, if this is a temporary representation, a symbol, then eventually the goal is for the whole to manifest through this symbol, and eventually we are destined to grow into the likeness of the universe and wield all those powers of a cosmic scale here through this individual form. Finer implications include the fact that every gesture, every movement, every position and arrangement of our body symbolically expresses something of the cosmos. A gesture of a hand, where you arrange the fingers in a particular way, you make a mudra, arrange them in a certain way, involves putting in relation certain cosmic powers within our body and therefore producing a specific outcome. This is the whole basis of the science of mudras. Among all the functions of the body, the one function which you do not see anywhere in the universe among any other creatures, you do not see them in stones or in plants or in animals, is the power of speech. All other functions you will find represented in animals, at least, or at least in the more developed animals. But speech is an extraordinary power which, as the mother observes, even the animals find fascinating. When a human being speaks, the animals stop and listen, and they are fascinated. Something deep within them recognizes that here is a power which is special. And what is this power capable of doing? While with gestures you could communicate things, with speech you are able to communicate not only so much more, but you can communicate things which your gesture cannot communicate. For example, with gestures, sign language, you have words which you can convert to sign languages. But you cannot communicate the feeling through the subtle intonations of the voice. We are able to communicate certain nuances of feeling which the sign language cannot carry, which printed text cannot carry. You can say to somebody, yes, or yes, or yes. You can have a whole range of variations just with that one word. The way the tonality moves conveys so much more than the word itself. And so there is a certain power in the speech to convey things which are of a domain non-material. Feelings, thoughts, and sometimes even deeper experiences. And we see in the expression of speech layers now. When the speech is used to describe mere facts, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, it is raining outside, the amount of rain is so many drops to a second, whatever it is, it deals only with superficial sensory facts. When you say, I feel this, you're already communicating things which are non-material and which could not otherwise have been transmitted to another. How do I communicate what I feel in my heart to another person who is unable to connect directly to my emotions? And speech is the only vehicle which allows you to do that. And through speech, you are able to draw out, evoke, or invoke, provoke exactly the same emotion in the other person. So when a person speaks movingly of an experience, he is transmitting his experience to another with the language, with the power of speech. And then, still more abstract, the domain of pure thought, abstractions of relationships, concepts, and ideas, which there would be no other way to communicate. We are able to transmit through speech. Beyond thought are deeper experiences of the spirit, for which we may set a vocabulary, but the vocabulary has no meaning unless it corresponds to something in your experience. If somebody says self-realization, these are only words which have no meaning to a person who has not had the self-realization or a glimpse of it. And yet, when the person who lives in that consciousness speaks of it from that state of consciousness, the power of the experience is carried in the words, it touches you, it moves you, it awakes a resonance of that experience in us to whatever extent we are able to receive. when a Ramana Maharshi spoke of his experiences or the nature of the self, it had a power of conviction. People would feel the impact of that presence and the peace as if they were themselves experiencing it, at least for that moment. When we read Sri Aurobindo's descriptions of certain experiences, which are some of the highest spiritual experiences, well beyond our reach, yet in the moment of reading, in the moment of listening to the mother describe her experiences in the agenda, we are as if moved to feel that experience as if it is happening in us, however superficially, but it feels at that point so vivid that when it passes, we know we have lost something, but we are not able to recollect it or recreate it simply by remembering. There's something transmitted in the vibration of the speech, that in the act of speaking, the meaning is communicated and received in the other at an experiential level. In fact, if we consider this truth, it is the only explanation for how we can teach a child a new language. We grow up with the language of our parents, of our environment. Nobody bothers to explain this word means that. At best, you can point to an object and say, this is stone, that is plant. But when it comes to emotions and thoughts, there is no way to explain. But in the very act of speaking the word, in the very act of experiencing that communication, we receive subliminally the meaning of it and we associate that experience with that sound. And that's how we learn most of our vocabulary. There is an enormous transmission going on behind using the vehicle of the words of the speech. But the content behind is so much more than what the speech superficially in its surface word meaning carries. So it is this which Sri Aurobindo is pointing to. In the Vedic system, the word, capital W, was the creatrix. By the word, Brahma creates the forms of the universe. So our power of speech is only a symbolic, reduced representation of the speech, the vibration, the word by which the whole universe was born. And since our body is a symbolic representation of the universe, that creative power is organized in our instrument of speech. And if we understand that human speech is attempting to recover something higher, then that word must be above our power of mental construction. All creation is expression by the word, capital W. But the form which is expressed is only a symbol of or representation of the thing which is. So when you say a sentence, this is beautiful, the word beautiful is undefinable. There is no way we are able to explain to somebody who does not know the experience of beauty what we mean by beautiful. And yet, when speaking and saying this is beautiful, the child is able to understand, recognize the experience. And when you say it's a beautiful idea, we're dealing with a complete abstraction which is outside the domain of the senses. What a beautiful idea. And immediately we understand what is meant by a beautiful idea. So the form in which this word comes is only a symbol or representation. The thing is there. And this is now, Sri Aurobindo is bringing it to the point of creation. When you speak of something to be done, something as an order, as a command, as a conviction, you are putting a certain creative, formative power, which is there already above, which is now being given a material, vibrational form. In Savitri, in the poem Savitri, you will remember the lines which describe how Savitri's mother insists that Narad should speak up what he has seen. And Sri Aurobindo describes in very suggestive lines that as he speaks, it's as if he sets in motion the whole machinery of fate. It is by his speech that that thing which was waiting to manifest is now activated and is made permanent, is made inevitable on a material level. We see this in human speech, which only presents to the mind a mental form of the object, but the object it seeks to express is itself only a form or representation of another reality. And this mental form that the speech gives is only paralleling, like a little support, a tiny tail end of the things of the higher reality. That reality is Brahman. Brahman expresses by the word a form or presentation of himself in the objects of sense and consciousness which constitute the universe, just as the human word expresses a mental image of those objects. That word is creative in a deeper and more original sense than human speech, and with a power of which the utmost creativeness of human speech can be only a far off and feeble analogy. So when we speak of the word of Brahman, it is that vibrational, conceptual power of manifestation by which the whole universe was born. The human speech parallels that, but at a lower level in a subdued, limited, distorted way. And yet, when the human speech is attuned to that higher power, it can use this as a vehicle to articulate, to convey, even to manifest. So we know, for example, of the power of mantras. Sri Aurobindo will shortly take up that whole theme. And by the repetition of a mantra, a certain spiritual reality can be linked to the material and brought into manifestation. Just as we bring normally ideas into form, things beyond the domain of ideas also can be brought into form. Things can be made to happen which otherwise would be impossible. There is an incident in the life of Ganapati Muni where he saw a fire spreading across in the village. It was a large fire already, it was spreading fast. There was not much time, people were running. And he stopped there and invoked a mantra from the Veda and extinguished the fire. The mantra he invoked was a mantra of Agni. But in invoking Agni, he asked for that fire to be put out, not to create one, but by the same token, one could create a fire. If you think about it, Agni as a cosmic principle is already everywhere. Agni in its material expression is already operative on those huts which were burning. What did he do? His human vehicle, body, speech instruments, mind, became a vehicle to connect to a higher spiritual reality, which is everywhere anyway. But through this vehicle, it was given an entry into the domain of material vibration in a specific way with a specific intention. And it produced that result. The mother makes a very interesting observation. She said, instead of greeting people with a good morning, casually, mechanically, as we do, as a social interface, if you put meaning into it, purpose into it, intention, genuinely wishing the person a good morning, the same words will actually carry a vibration that will make a difference to their life. And this is true of all the words we speak. There is a representation of the creative power of Brahman here in a miniature, limited way. He goes deeper into this whole concept of what the word does when we speak. What does it bring up? How it brings up, which we can take up next time. But we get here a sense of the depth which is implied in these very simple statements when the Upanishad says, speech of our speech. How much is held behind that? We get some sense of it. So we could simply read the last paragraph of the previous chapter and briefly meditate on it. And each of these exegetic lines is emphasized by the reiterated admonition that Brahman seek to know, and not this which men follow after here. Neither mind, life, sense, and speech, nor their objects and expressions are the reality which we have to know and pursue. True knowledge is of that which forms these instruments for us, but is itself independent of their utilities. True possession and enjoyment is of that which, while it creates these objects of our pursuit, itself makes nothing the object of its pursuit and passion, but is eternally satisfied with all things in the joy of its immortal being.